The wind howled through the canyon like a mourning mother. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a single carriage creaked its way up a narrow trail carved into the mountain's shoulder. The sun was dying over the western ridge, casting a copper sheen over the dust. Inside the carriage, wrapped in a gray wool shawl, sat a woman with pale skin, closed eyes, and hands folded quietly over her lap. Her name was Evelyn Carrington. She was 36. Once the most radiant woman in all of Elkhorn County, now she could not see the roses bloom, nor the faces of the people who used to adore her. Blindness came slowly after a fever. And silence followed even quicker, because her husband, Harold Carrington, had no use for a wife who could not see or serve, as he put it. Harold owned half the railroad, 3 cattle yards, and the local sheriff's respect. People said his fortune had come from smart business and God's blessing. But folks didn't see what he did when no one was watching. Especially not to Evelyn. That day, he sent her away. "It's for your health," he told the townsfolk. "It's what the doctor recommends," he told the priest. "It's peace and quiet she needs," he told his mistress. But there was no doctor's order. No care in his heart. Just an old log cabin hidden far into the pine forest where no one ventured, except coyotes, and sometimes worse. Evelyn didn't know. She never heard the conversation between Harold and the driver. She couldn't see the look of pity on the ranch hand's face as he opened the carriage door and helped her down. The cabin was cold. Musty. No running water. No servants. Just a tin stove, a straw bed, and a pantry with a few weeks' worth of dried beans and cornmeal. "I'll come back every Sunday," the driver lied gently. "You'll be just fine, ma'am." Then he left. The only soul who stayed was old Dusty, the horse that had pulled the carriage up. A chestnut gelding with wise, tired eyes. He was meant to return with the driver, but the reins snapped as the wagon turned. Dusty bolted and wandered into the trees, refusing to leave the scent behind. Evelyn spent her first night curled up near the fire, shivering not just from the cold, but from the ache of abandonment. She called Harold's name once, then never again. Only Dusty stood outside the window, watching her silhouette behind the flickering light. The days blurred. Evelyn tried to manage, counting steps from the stove to the bed, from the pantry to the porch. She whispered to herself to remember where things were. Her world became one of sound and scent, the creak of pine boards, the rustle of wind, the distant howl of a wolf, and the warm snort of a horse. Dusty came every morning. He stood by the porch like a sentinel. She didn't know he was there at first. Until one day, she tripped on the icy steps and landed hard on her knees. Her cry echoed into the woods. That's when she felt the soft nudge of a muzzle against her shoulder. "Who's there?" she whispered, hands trembling. Dusty let out a low breath and pressed his head against her palm. From that day forward, the horse never left her side. He brought her warmth just by being near. She spoke to him as if he were her only family. She named him Dusty after the feel of his coat, the same dusty red as the trails of her youth. He followed her to the well. Waited outside as she cooked. Nudged her when she walked too close to a tree. She began to laugh again. Just softly. She began to sing. She never knew that someone was watching from afar. Behind the trees, behind the dark ridge across the valley, a man sat on horseback in a black hat. Watching. Waiting. He wasn't there to protect her. He was there to make sure she never came back. 2 weeks passed. Snow had begun to settle on the pine branches like quiet sorrow. The world around the cabin turned white and soundless. Evelyn, bundled in threadbare quilts, kept the stove burning with what little wood she could find. Her hands blistered from chopping kindling she could barely carry. But Dusty, he never left. He would push logs closer with his nose. He stood over her like a warm shadow when the wind turned cruel. He neighed gently when she overslept, as if keeping time for a soul that could no longer see the light. And still, every night, someone watched. The man in the black hat sat motionless on a black mare across the ravine, just out of earshot. His name was Clayton Dorsey, one of Harold Carrington's oldest ranch hands. But he wasn't here by loyalty. He was here by blackmail. You see, Harold had secrets. Real dirty ones. And Dorsey had helped cover up more than one suspicious fire and more than 2 missing riders. That's how he bought silence. And when he needed someone to watch the cabin, make sure the woman doesn't wander down the trail, Dorsey agreed, for a price. But what Harold didn't know was that Dorsey had once loved Evelyn. Long before her marriage. Long before the money. And watching her now, blind, alone, discarded like livestock, made something in him twist. Back in town, Harold Carrington wasn't worried. He was too busy sipping bourbon in his parlor, celebrating the latest railroad expansion with Sheriff Malloy and a few senators who owed him favors. "How's the missus?" someone asked, half-hearted. Harold smirked. "Out of the way. Where she belongs. Now I can focus on more pressing matters, like my inheritance." That's when he pulled out a document, freshly signed and stamped. "A will." It declared Harold the sole recipient of Evelyn's family land, should anything happen to her. Her family had left her a sprawling patch of oil-rich terrain in Dead Horse Gulch. Land Harold never cared about, until the surveyors found black gold. But there was one problem. Evelyn had to sign it. Or she had to disappear. Harold had tried for weeks to get her thumbprint. He sent a false lawyer to the cabin once, but Dusty kicked him straight off the porch. Literally. Now, Harold grew impatient. If she wouldn't sign, she'd vanish. And no one would question it. After all, she was blind. Alone. Weak. Or so he thought. One night, the storm rolled in fierce, lightning cracking the sky like broken bones. Evelyn was boiling water for a thin soup when she heard it, hoofbeats, heavy and fast. Not Dusty. Not familiar. Then, a knock. Hard. 3 times. She stumbled toward the door, hand shaking on the latch. "Harold?" she asked softly. "No, ma'am." "It's Dorsey," came the reply, gruff but strangely gentle. She hesitated. Dorsey? A name from the past, like a dream, now blurred by years of neglect and isolation. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice barely above the wind. "To warn you. Your husband's planning something. You need to get out of here." "I can't. I can't see. I can't even make it down the ridge without falling." There was silence. Just the hiss of wind through the gaps in the walls. Then a sound, a deep neigh. Dusty stood behind her, as if understanding every word. "The horse," Dorsey whispered. "He's been staying with you?" Evelyn nodded, touching Dusty's mane. "He's the only one who hasn't left." That night, under cloak of storm and darkness, Dorsey crafted a plan. He couldn't carry her on horseback, not safely, not in the ice. But he could wait. Watch. Protect. And Dusty. Dusty would do more than watch. In the days that followed, the tycoon's plan began to unfold. A rider came, one of Harold's hired men. Disguised as a surveyor, he brought a bottle of wine and a bundle of legal papers. He knocked on the cabin door with a silver smile. But Evelyn never answered. Dusty had sensed something wrong. Hours before the man arrived, he had stood in the path, ears pinned, hooves restless. When the man tried to pass, Dusty reared up. Hooves struck the air like thunder. The man turned white and fled without looking back. And Dorsey saw everything from the trees. "That horse ain't just loyal," he muttered. "He's guarding her like she's the last light in a dark world." But Evelyn didn't know what was really coming. Harold was growing impatient. He sent word for a final rider, someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who made people disappear. And he was coming. In 3 days. The third morning dawned gray, heavy with snow. Evelyn awoke to silence, too quiet, even for the mountain. Not a bird, not a breeze, not even Dusty's steady breath outside the window. Her hands fumbled for her shawl, her cane. Something in her chest whispered, today is different. She stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching softly on fresh frost. Dusty, she called. No answer. Dusty? Then she heard it. A gun cocking. She froze. A man stepped out from behind the tree line. His boots silent. His coat dark as grave soil. He said nothing, only stared at her. A scar ran across his cheek like lightning carved into flesh. This wasn't a lawyer. Not a surveyor. He was the one Harold sent when signatures failed. Who are you? Evelyn whispered, backing up toward the door. The man didn't answer. He reached into his coat. A flash of silver, a revolver. Evelyn stumbled, heart pounding. She tried to get back inside, but the step was too high, her foot caught, and she fell hard onto the porch. Then, a roar. Not from the sky. From the trees. A blur of chestnut fur thundered from the ridge. Dusty. He galloped at full speed, hoofs pounding like war drums. The man turned, raised his weapon. Too late. Dusty struck him full force. The gun flew from the man's hand, landing yards away in the snow. The man screamed as hooves came down again, once, twice, until he rolled into the ditch and didn't move. Dusty reared, nostrils flaring, breath white with rage. Evelyn sobbed into his mane. You came back. You saved me. She clung to the horse as if holding on to the last thread of the world. And Dusty didn't move, not until Dorsey came crashing through the trees, rifle in hand, out of breath. Saw the rider. Been tracking him since sunrise, he gasped. But your horse. Lord have mercy, he beat me to it. Dorsey looked at Dusty with something like awe. That's not just a horse. That's an angel with hooves. They tied the man up, he was still breathing, groaning in pain. Dorsey found a forged document in his coat pocket, Evelyn's fake death certificate. Harold had planned it all. If the signature didn't work, the grave would. Dorsey handed her the paper, folding it into her palm. Your husband wants you dead, Evelyn. And the whole town's been fed lies. Evelyn stood still. Face pale. Hands trembling. Then she said just one thing. Take me back. The journey down the ridge was brutal. The snow grew thicker. The wind bit like wolves. But Dusty carried her, slow, careful, step by step. She held onto his neck, trusting blindly in every movement. She didn't cry anymore. She had no tears left. Only fire. By the time they reached town, dusk had fallen. Lights flickered in windows. Music spilled from the saloon. People laughed, unaware of the truth galloping toward them. Dorsey rode ahead, kicking up dust into the sheriff's office. Where's Harold Carrington? He barked. Home, most likely, the sheriff yawned. Why? He do something wrong? Dorsey tossed the forged papers on the desk. Then pointed to the bruised man tied behind the horse. Attempted murder. And he didn't act alone. The sheriff's eyes widened. And just then, the door creaked open. Evelyn stepped in. Standing tall despite the cold. Despite the bruises. Her face white as frost, but her voice steady. I was never sick. I was discarded. I was never weak. I was betrayed. But I remember who I am now. And Dusty stood behind her, still as stone. Harold Carrington was arrested that very night. He tried to talk his way out, waving his banknotes and shouting about lies and madness. But the forged certificate, the bruised assassin, and the testimony of Dorsey and Evelyn were more powerful than all his gold. He was dragged from his mansion in chains. The townsfolk stared in silence. And someone muttered. All that money, and still no soul. Winter melted into spring. Snow gave way to golden wheat and apple blossoms. The town of Elkhorn shifted quietly, like it had awoken from a bad dream. Harold Carrington, once hailed as the region's king of steel and cattle, now sat behind iron bars. His name, once whispered with respect, now only stirred shame. No amount of money could wash off what he'd done. The trial was swift. Evelyn stood before the judge, blind but unshaken. Her words echoed in the silent courtroom. A man who sees the world but lacks conscience is more blind than any woman like me. Gasps filled the room. But Evelyn didn't flinch. The verdict, guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Harold would never see daylight as a free man again. Back on the ranch outskirts, Dorsey built a new cabin, not for Evelyn, but with her. A modest home, filled with warmth, music, and the smell of lavender she once grew as a girl. He never asked for forgiveness, but he gave her something no one had offered in years. Respect. And freedom. And always by her side, Dusty. The townsfolk began visiting the little ranch. Some brought oats, others brought apples. Children came just to see the horse that saved a blind lady. He stood proudly in the yard, letting tiny hands touch his mane, his broad back a living legend. One day, the mayor came with a brass plaque in hand. He nailed it gently to the front gate. In honor of Dusty, the guardian of Elkhorn Ridge. Loyalty has no language. Love has no eyes. But justice always finds a way. Years passed. Evelyn never regained her sight, but she said she didn't need it. She heard laughter again. She felt sunlight on her face. She smelled the seasons change. She sang songs that made children dance. And sometimes, at dusk, she would sit on the porch and whisper, "You saved me, old boy." Dusty would nuzzle her shoulder in reply, then rest quietly at her feet, as if he, too, understood that he had changed not just a life, but a whole town. Sometimes the people who promise to protect us are the very ones who betray us. And sometimes, those who save us come on 4 legs, not 2. This story reminds us. Loyalty is not about words. It's about presence. Love is not about vision. It's about sacrifice. And justice doesn't always ride in on a sheriff's badge, sometimes, it gallops in on hooves. The Horse Boy by Rupert Isaacson, a true story of healing through the bond between a boy with autism and a Mongolian horse. Blind Courage by Bill Irwin, the inspiring journey of a blind man who hiked the Appalachian Trail with only his guide dog. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in kindness, justice, and second chances. And remember, never underestimate the power of a loyal heart, even if it beats in the chest of a horse.